Anybody episode 817 of the podcast, Assuming America, the Your Tour Sports Podcast. It is Thursday, January 4th, 2024, people. I hope everybody's doing well. I hope everybody is having a great day. And I'll say this. When I signed off on Tuesday, post-college football playoff edition of the show, I said, listen, I don't know when we're going to do another show, but be patient. We'll get there at some point. And today, we're not quite going to get to the college football national championship preview. We'll do a show Friday previewing the title game. But it felt like there was enough going on. We have a mailbag-ish, grab-bag-ish type show where we talk about a couple topics. I answer some of your questions. And I think it's going to be the best show maybe we've ever done. I'd say it's definitely going to be a top 2 show of 2024 for sure. Here's what you need to know about today's show. We're going to open. Did you see what JJ McCarthy said about Ohio State? That is the Michigan quarterback. He called out Ohio State. We're going to talk about that. Take a quick break, come back. Georgia. There has been kind of an interesting narrative this week on the internet, if you will, about like Georgia, should they have been in after the way they played Florida State? Is there a reason they should have been out? And what would have happened if they got in? There is one data point that says they would have won the national championship if they got in. So I discuss, should they have been in? Would they have won? It's an interesting conversation. Speaking of interesting conversation, 2 mailbag questions to wrap the show. Both college hoops. Have you seen Dan Hurley and Rick Pitino are going back and forth in the media? And it's crazy. We're going to discuss that. Also, a very interesting question about Kentucky's freshman class in basketball this is. And if we could potentially see an NBA draft record with some of the guys in that locker room. So busy show, fun show. Obviously, as we get out of college football, we'll do more college hoops, but a lot of college hoops on today's show. Tomorrow, again, we will preview the national championship. But today, as I said, grab bag, mailbag. And with that said, let's not waste any more time and let's get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, let's talk about it. So obviously, look, national championship game is next Monday. We know that. Torres is going to make his pick on Friday. You know that. Good luck. Tune in. Pay attention. All that good stuff. But I bring it up because on Wednesday, so yesterday, 4 or 5 days before the title game, we had our first national championship game media availability. Both teams went on Monday, travel probably on Tuesday, and Wednesday, there was a media availability with the coaches and the players. Normally, this stuff, pretty much, everybody says the right things. They're so good. We have to play our best game, taking it one game at a time, blah, 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 blah. But I bring it up because our buddy JJ McCarthy, the quarterback at Michigan, had some very interesting comments to say about the year that was at Michigan, the sign stealing scandal, etc. So let's dive in. He was basically asked about cheating and scandal and sign stealing on Wednesday. Here's what he had to say. He said, and I quote, this is a direct quote, Torres ain't paraphrasing here. He said, yeah. And I feel like it's so unfortunate because there's probably, I don't want to say a crazy number, but I'd say a good number, 80% of teams in college football that steal signs. It's just the thing about football. It's been around for years. But he continued, and this is where it got interesting. We actually had to adapt because in 2020, 2019, when Ohio State was 2020 or 2019, when Ohio State was stealing our signs, which is legal, and they were doing it, we had to get up to that level, the level that they were at, and we had to make it an even playing field. So how about this? Just when you thought this story maybe was going to come to an end. Oh, by the way, fun fact. We found out that Connor Stalions was at the Rose Bowl on Monday afternoon, which, by the way, he's entitled to be. He's a fan like everybody else. Connor Stalions at the Rose Bowl. JJ McCarthy asked about the sign stealing, and he says, listen, we may have stolen some signs, but we were just leveling up with Ohio State. And my goodness, is there a lot to break down. So first of all, let's make sure that we get some baseline facts straight, okay? So one, it is important to note that when he's talking about when years that Ohio State may have allegedly, I'm just saying alleged, let's call it what it is, allegedly have stolen signs. It's worth noting. Michigan didn't play Ohio State in 2020. So they couldn't have stolen signs in 2020 because they didn't play. That was the COVID year. The game got canceled. I think Michigan finished 2-4, whatever. Two, it is worth noting, Michigan is under NCAA investigation, not for stealing signs. I want to make that clear. They are not in trouble for stealing signs. They are in trouble because Connor Stalions and his associates allegedly, reportedly, sent others to other stadiums to advance scout teams specifically with video. Put their iPhone on the sideline, got paid whatever, and we're still trying to figure out all the details. And what I would say is, whether you think it's a big deal or not, whether you think that video signs, videoing the other team's sideline should be legal or not, it is the NCAA violation. The sign stealing is not why Michigan is in trouble. It is that they sent advanced scouts to other teams' stadium. And so JJ McCarthy, just to be clear, buddy, nobody's saying that you're not allowed to steal signs, which, as he said, it's legal. At the same time, though, you can't send people in advance. And so that's important. Those are important things to know. Now, let's get into the quote itself, because obviously it's a spicy meatball of a quote, okay? One, we know it's just fascinating because he called out Ohio State specifically. And let me say, you talk about a team and a program and a coach that's taking L's right now. Ryan Day is just trying to get out of the spotlight, and he just keeps getting dragged in. Ohio State had the worst performance of the Ryan Day era in the Cotton Bowl, and I know they were down to a third-string quarterback. They were awful, though. We all know they were awful. We all watched the game. The third-string quarterback, who was the second-string quarterback in practice, just did not look prepared, and it's just a debacle right now. And I don't know what Ryan Day, listen, let me even paraphrase. Let me specify this. I'm not accusing Ryan Day of anything. JJ McCarthy said it. I don't know. There's obviously all sorts of internet rumors. You hear all sorts of reports. Last week with the iPads at the Rose Bowl, they said neither Alabama or Michigan were using their traditional iPads because another program allegedly hacked into them. And so everybody made the assumption it was Ohio State. I'm not saying it was. I'm just saying what the internet says. So I'm not here to accuse Ohio State of anything. JJ McCarthy certainly did. But what I think this specific quote says two things to me about both the sign stealing scandal and then also kind of the present and future of Michigan. I think one, JJ McCarthy, what he was trying to say is something that I have said on this show forever, is that I do think that the scandal at Michigan was largely overblown this year because everybody steals signs, even if, again, to be clear, everybody doesn't send people to other stadiums, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's interesting because if you follow this show, you know that when the scandal first broke, I was kind of the guy that was like, dude, this could be pretty big. If it's illegal, if you're sending people to other stadiums, blah, 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 that's illegal and you need to be punished for it. And I still believe that Michigan, in some way, shape, or form, did deserve a punishment going forward. At the same time, two things happened. One, I completely thought that the Big Ten totally overstepped their bounds. We don't know what Michigan knew. We don't know what Jim Harbaugh knew. We don't know what the players knew. And so it bothered me that the Big Ten took this proactive stance. I have no skin in the game. I don't care who wins and loses these games. I went to UConn. Who wins the Big Ten championship means nothing to me. But it was pretty cool to see Michigan shove it in the face of the haters, beat Penn State at Penn State, beat Ohio State for a third straight year. And I did think that it became bigger than it actually was. As JJ McCarthy said, everybody steals signs. And what bothered me is this idea that, you see this grainy piece of video and there's Connor Stalions and he must be whispering something, da-da-da-da. And it's like, oh my God, they knew a pass play was coming. Michigan's cheating. And it's like, well, they knew a pass play was coming because it was 3rd and 19. It's just, it got so big. And I think JJ McCarthy reminded us, like, everybody does this to a degree. I'm not saying this is me, Aaron Torres, talking now, that it makes what Michigan did all right. It is against the rules and you have to be punished accordingly. But I also stand by what I've said all along. I thought the Big Ten overstepped their bounds. I still have seen zero proof that Jim Harbaugh knew, and I give Michigan credit. I said on Tuesday's show, after they beat Alabama to go to the national championship game, I said the bottom line is that I think it's time that we end this charade that the only reason that they went from 2-4 in the COVID year to whatever it is, what were they? They were 12-1 the following year, or 12-2, I guess it would have been. 12-1 last year, and now they're 14-0 this year. So I'm not even going to try to do that math in my head. That's like 42-2 or something, 32-2, whatever it is. But I just bring it up because, like, I just kept saying, like, everybody wants to say that was the only reason they improved. Well, they beat Penn State without Connor Stallions, without Jim Harbaugh on the sidelines. They beat Ohio State without Jim Harbaugh, without Connor Stallions on the sidelines. And they certainly beat Alabama. I guess Connor Stallions was in the building. So, one, I give credit to Michigan because they're just proving like this wasn't as big of a deal as you think. We don't need Connor Stallions to beat Ohio State, to beat Penn State, etc. The other thing that JJ McCarthy's quote tells me, I do believe in my heart of hearts that the Michigan team really believes that it's us against the world. And I'm going to take it a step further. And this is the part that Michigan fans might not like. This really kind of feels like a last dance kind of season to me for this group, these players, and certainly the head coach. And what I mean by that is a couple things. One, as far as the Michigan against the world, I'll tell you this. I was at the Rose Bowl on Monday. The number of Michigan versus everybody, us against them, Michigan versus the world, whatever. The number of those t-shirts that I saw was staggering. Couldn't count them on one hand, couldn't count them on two hands, couldn't count them on 10 fingers and 10 toes. I mean, they were everywhere. And I think the fan base has bought in. And I think beyond that, I think the players have bought in as well. And by the way, I don't even blame them. All year long, you've been called cheaters, fakes, frauds. The only reason you won is this. The only reason you won is that. So I think that was JJ McCarthy's way of, it's basically his last real media availability. Obviously, they'll have some in Houston this weekend. But I think that was his way of saying, like, I'm probably going to the pros after this. And guess what? I'm just going to tell you how I feel right now. And beyond that, that last part that I just mentioned, I think to me, this just feels like the entire Michigan program just getting off their chest how they really feel about this, because like it or not, fair or not, there are certainly going to be some people that are in this program next year that might have to deal with the ramifications of this alleged sign stealing scandal. But a lot of them are going to be gone. I do think Jim Harbaugh is going to be gone. I hope I'm wrong. He's great for college football. I hope he stays forever. He's certainly got Ryan Day figured out. But right now, it feels like it's trending towards him being gone. 40-something seniors in that locker room, a school that really, I think, benefited very much from the COVID year. You have a guy like Blake Corum who had that extra year of eligibility. JJ McCarthy probably going pro after this year as well. And so I bring it up because this feels like we're just going to get it off our chest. We're just going to tell you exactly how we feel, because guess what? The consequences that are coming, we're just going to tell you. We're telling our side of the story. We've been quiet for too long. We've been called too many names. But guess what? We ain't staying quiet no more. A bunch of us aren't going to be here in 2 weeks. And guess what? We're going to go out in style telling you exactly how we feel. So I love the quotes from JJ McCarthy. I'm not going to accuse Ohio State of anything, but I have no problem with him sticking up for his teammates, for himself, and for Michigan football. We'll see if there's any response out of Ohio State land anytime soon. That was an incredible quote, though. All right, so what we're going to do, take a quick break. One more college football segment before we get to a little grab bag college hoops. I do want to switch gears and talk about Georgia. An interesting tweet came out on Tuesday that basically insinuated if Georgia had been in the college football playoff, oh, they're winning that sucker. Do I actually believe it? Should we believe it? And should we even care that Georgia is not in the playoff? We'll discuss all that. Quick break. Be right back. All right, everybody. I'm back. Gonna be back. I do want to switch gears. I want to get to one other football conversation before we do switch gears to basketball. And I frankly want to talk about a team that we talked about quite a bit during the regular season, not so much since the season has ended. That's the Georgia Bulldogs. So Georgia, obviously, look, we know that they had an incredible regular season. Started the year number one, deserving number one, two-time reigning national champions coming into the year, start 12-0, and then they lose to Alabama in the SEC championship game. Ultimately, it happens. Alabama's good. Only one team is going to be able to hoist that skinny trophy at the end of the year and call themselves national champions. And so I bring it up because after Georgia lost that game, we kind of moved on. But then A funny thing has happened with Georgia over the last couple of days that has certainly created a lot of narrative on social media. And I wanted to bring it here today because I thought it was at least an interesting conversation. And that narrative is this: based on the fact that Georgia absolutely destroyed Florida State. And you can debate Florida State didn't want to be there, who cares? The bottom line is Georgia showed up. Georgia showed up on a mission. Georgia showed up on a mission to prove that they're the best team in college football. Destroyed Florida State 63-3. And following that, there really was kind of this renewed push that somehow Georgia belonged in the college football playoff. I bring it up because this was especially interesting. It came from the Hard Rock Bets Twitter account. Now, Hard Rock is a popular hotel and casino down in the Miami, Florida area. I am here to tell you, I've been to that casino. It is a great spot. Great spot. Neither here nor there. I was with family, so I didn't do anything wrong. You check the security cameras. Torres was on his best behavior, okay? But great casino. But they put out a post on social media, and it very simply said this. This post came on Monday. This came on Monday from the Hard Rock Bet account. It says, hypothetical spreads if these teams played Monday night. This is, of course, after the semifinals when we know that Michigan is going to play Washington. According to Hard Rock Bet, Georgia would be a 2.5-point favorite against Michigan in a hypothetical national championship game, and Georgia would have been a 6.5-point favorite versus Washington in the national championship game. Now, to be blunt, these conversations kind of annoy me. But it was clear that people were very passionate on both sides of this topic. What would have happened if Georgia got in? Did they deserve to be in? Whatever. And so I decided to bring it here. But rather than just bring the conversation myself, rather than just me spit out 8, 10, 12 minutes of conversation, what I decided to do was instead put it out on social media. I wanted to see some responses. So I put it on both Twitter and YouTube. And I basically asked a simple question. If Georgia was in the college football playoff, do you believe they would have won it? Why or why not? On Twitter, as of, it is about 7:15 Eastern time. As of right now, the poll on Twitter, 70.4% said yes, they believe Georgia would win it. 29.6% said they don't believe Georgia would have won it. On YouTube, 63% said yes, 37% said no. And let me tell you this, before I give you my opinion, there were a lot of very passionate responses to this answer, okay? So a lot of people believe the answer was yes, obviously 70% on Twitter, 63% on YouTube. Among the people that said yes, Shredder on Twitter said the SEC title game this year reminded me of the last time these two teams played. Obviously, that was the national championship game 2 years ago. Georgia is superior and, in my opinion, the best team in the country, but they played their worst game of the year versus Bama, obviously due in large part to Bama. So Shredder says yes, he thinks that Georgia will win the national championship. Crimson Knight 35 on YouTube had an interesting comment. He said, I hate to say this as a Bama fan, I believe Georgia would have beaten Bama in a rematch. I also think Georgia would handle Texas and Washington. I think Michigan is the best team this year, and I don't think Georgia would have beat them. I believe Michigan beats Washington 28-16. This Michigan team feels like they're destined to be champions. As far as the no, now I will say the no part of this conversation got people very fired up. AJ Southward said they would have lost to all 4 teams in the playoff. That's via YouTube. College sports superfan on Twitter said, this is disrespectful to the teams that are in it. Not everything has to revolve around the SEC. It's funny that he says that because my buddy Mike Luke, who of course covers Arizona, a really good friend of mine, he put out a semi-joking tweet in his own right. He said, what Aaron is asking is, should the playoffs have been Alabama, Georgia, Ole Miss, and Tennessee? Mike, I love you. That's not what I was talking about, buddy. And then, and Mike knows that too. Here for a short time says, no, the SEC was not very good this year. The Big 10, Big 12, and Pac-12 were better across the board. Not sure I agree with that. And then Dion from YouTube, I thought, said the best part. He said, really stupid question. It gives Georgia fans a mental championship and they can still be mouthy and cocky even though they failed to make the playoffs. And so the question now becomes, Georgia would have been favored over Michigan in the national championship game. They obviously would have been favored over Bama because they were just favored over Bama 3 weeks ago in the SEC championship game. They would have been in the playoffs, certainly would have been favored over Washington, and I believe they would have been favored over Texas as well. So my question, the question that I will answer now, do I believe if Georgia was in the college football playoff, they would have won the national championship? I'm just here to tell you it's a dumb question, a dumb conversation, and I think even the logic behind arguing for Georgia is dumb, even though they were a great team with a great season. First of all, let me start by saying this. If the argument is they destroyed Florida State in the Orange Bowl, sorry, that doesn't count, okay? The win counts. It counts in the win-loss column. That they get a trophy for it. But come on. We all know that Florida State did not care. Now, to Georgia's credit, they showed up. They wanted to prove a point. They wanted to prove they were the best team in college football, and they certainly laid it on Florida State. But Florida State was down 30 guys. Now, to be clear, to be fair, even if Florida State, basically, let's put it this way. Even if Florida State had the team that won the ACC championship game. So Jordan Travis isn't coming back because he's hurt. But even with that defense and the skill position guys, they're not beating Georgia. They're just not. And by the way, Florida State, I didn't really do the Florida State rant because we didn't really have time. Florida State, I'm over you. It sucks that you got left out, but you, like Georgia, had a chance to prove to the world that you were scorned and you chose to whine and complain for a month straight. So I'm sorry, credit to Georgia guys for showing up, but I also don't think using Georgia as validation is reason enough to say that they belong to be there because they won by 60 in their bowl game. Two, what I would also say is this. I found it very interesting that even when the playoff field was announced, I don't think that anybody truly in their hearts believed that Georgia should be in the playoff. But what I did hear was a lot of this. Well, if you're moving up Alabama past Florida State and using the very vague best term, then you have to do it for Georgia as well. There is no one that would argue that Georgia isn't one of the 4 best teams in college football this year. Now, do I believe in my heart of hearts that Georgia's one of the 4 best teams? Absolutely. Do I believe that obviously Vegas thinks the same thing, or at least the sports books? I do, because Hard Rock bets seem to indicate that they think that Georgia would be favored against pretty much everybody in the playoff. At the same time, though, the case for Georgia as one of the 4 best teams is actually pretty thin. Don't give me the 29-game winning streak. Guess what? That includes last year and the year before. Don't give me, they didn't win the SEC. The biggest game of the year they lost. There's 2 teams in the playoff now, Michigan and Texas, that beat the team that you lost to. So I don't want to hear it. And by the way, this is the part that drives me crazy about this conversation about hypothetical point spreads. First of all, I'll say this, and I'm rambling. You know what I hate more than anything in sports? The piece of content that I hate more than anything, and I know I'm going in a different direction, I'll circle back. The number one thing that I hate in all of sports, in all of sports social media, is when a website or a writer or a podcaster or whoever does a redraft, right? Does a redraft. And what that means is somebody goes back and says, well, in this year, the 2013 NBA draft, if we did it over, Giannis would be the number 1 pick and he would have gone to the Cleveland Cavaliers. It's yeah, but we're not doing it over. And Giannis wasn't the number 1 pick and he's not going to Cleveland. So I don't care. And so ultimately, I don't really care about Vegas point spreads, but I also hate the conversation that the Vegas point spread tells everything there is to tell about a story, about a matchup, about a team. Listen, I'm going to be careful playing this is why we play the games on the field card, because Florida State fans are going to get mad at me. But the games on the field we can't just go strictly by Vegas point spreads, right? Because if we went strictly by Vegas point spreads, I get that Georgia would be favored over Michigan. But guess what? Michigan just played Alabama. They beat Alabama. Guess who Alabama beat before they played Michigan? It was Georgia. So I'm not going to feel sympathy for Georgia fans and assume that they would beat Michigan just because some hypothetical point spread says that. This is why we play the games. This is why we play the game. Herm Edwards, you play to win the game. That's what this is right here, right? Just think about it. The argument that Georgia would be favored over Michigan, who cares? We actually got the matchup that got the matchup. Georgia played Alabama. We knew that was a play-in game when it happened. We knew there was no real scenario that the loser was getting into the college football playoff. Georgia lost to Alabama, and Alabama lost to Michigan. So I don't care that Georgia would be favored over Michigan in a hypothetical game. It doesn't matter because the games were actually played. By the way, if we're going to go by fake hypothetical point spreads, go back to Monday night. Texas was a favorite over Washington. Washington won on the field. Does that mean that we're not supposed to count that result and we're just supposed to move Texas along to the national championship game? Of course not. So spare me with the point spreads. I'm not sold that Georgia is a definitive top 4 team. They lost to Bama. They're not better than Bama. Bama lost to Michigan and Texas, so you can't tell me they're better than those 3 teams. So at best, you're arguing that they're better than Washington, who, oh, by the way, has beaten every team on their schedule, Oregon twice, Texas once, et cetera, et cetera. So it sucks that we did not get to see Georgia in this college football playoff. What I will say, here's the good news. Georgia fans, if you're mad at me, if you're going to crush me, if you're angry, whatever, here's the good news. Next year, we get a 12-team playoff. And the one thing I will say more than anything, everyone's excited about the 12-team college football playoff. I am too, but I'm not excited just because of the games on the field. I'm excited because we can end these stupid arguments off of it. Kirby Smart, so fired up, so angry after that game, saying, we have to fix everything. Well, we did fix the playoff. We did fix the postseason. We get 12 teams in next year. A team like Florida State will never exist again. There will never be an undefeated power conference champion that does not make a 12-team college football playoff. So Florida State will have the chance to prove it on the field. Probably wouldn't have won the national championship this year without Jordan Travis. On the inverse, what I'll also say, Georgia will have a chance to prove it themselves next year. And that is the one thing I will say, Georgia fans. This year, there were only 4 spots. It sucks you weren't in because you were probably right in the conversation as one of the 4 best. But you didn't have the resume. The 4 teams that got in were probably the right teams. Florida State probably had more of an argument than you. But guess what? 12-team playoff era doesn't really matter. You go 12-1 and losing the SEC championship game, you're getting in that college football playoff and you are going to have a chance to prove the doubters wrong. But do I think that it's some incredible miscarriage of justice that Georgia was not in this college football playoff? I don't. It stinks this year. I would have loved to see it, but ultimately, I still stand by what I said a month ago. I think the committee got the 4 teams right. I wouldn't have put Georgia in over any of them. I think Florida State had more of an argument than Georgia. And the great news is you get to settle it all on the field next year. We're going to take a quick break. Be right back. 2 college football conversations that I do want to get to, or college basketball conversations I want to get to. One on the budding Rick Pitino, Dan Hurley rivalry. Also got a very interesting question about Kentucky's freshmen. Could they be looking at tying or surpassing their own NBA draft record? Quick break. College hoops. Be right back. All right, everybody. Hi, back. Good to be back. Good to be back. Final segment of the show. So good to be back. Do want to go ahead and wrap. As I said, this is kind of a grab bag, mailbag type show. And I've gotten 2 great college basketball questions over the course of the last 4 or 5 days. And it feels like we should address both of them here. It's kind of that midweekish show. Why not have a little bit of fun? Why not do something different? Let's dive in. The first one on a budding rivalry. The second one on the Kentucky Wildcats and a potentially historic freshman class. Let's start with the first question. This came from, let me pull up the Twitter handle here, TDA3397 on Twitter. TDA3397 is a St. John's fan. He started following me in the Torres on St. John's account once Pitino got hired. Everybody knows Torres' history with Pitino. It was actually exactly 1 year ago that I started the push publicly saying, St. John's, if you care about basketball, if you want to be a relevant program, go ahead and hire Rick Pitino. They did that. I don't want to take all the credit. I'm kidding, St. John's fans. I take no credit, but it is awesome that it played out. Anyway, TDA3397 tweeted at me on Wednesday morning. He said, Aaron, what do you make of the growing feud between UConn and St. John's? I personally love it. All right, so this is a topic that if you're a college hoops diehard, you might have seen. And certainly it has become a big topic of conversation in UConn circles, in St. John's circles. Let me give you a little bit of background as to what happened over the last couple days. So on Saturday, St. John's, obviously again, Rick Pitino is the head coach. They play their final out of conference game. And they're in this kind of weird pattern. It's year one. Pitino wants to play more games at the Garden. They're playing a bunch of games at Carnesecca Arena. That's the small on-campus arena. And on Saturday, they actually played a game out in Long Island. And so I bring it up. I believe that's where the Islanders play. I'm not even positive. But anyway, they played in Long Island. Most of their games are on campus this year. Pitino wants to get more games in Madison Square Garden. So he was asked about it after the game. He gave a very interesting answer. Here's what he said. He said, so the Garden is the best place to play. And right now, the only game that's going to get played next year at Carnesecca is Connecticut. Every other game we're going to negotiate. Asked if he was serious about that, this by Zach Braziller of the New York Post, Pitino said 100%. We're playing them at Carnesecca. It's definitely not a joke. I have my reasons. A lot of you probably sitting there, if you're not a Kentucky, or if you're not a UConn fan, if you're not a St. John's fan, probably wondering, why exactly would St. John's want to play the defending national champion, probably the biggest game on its schedule, not at Madison Square Garden? The answer is pretty simple. For people who don't know geography, Connecticut is a border town. UConn, every time they play in Madison Square Garden, gets a huge crowd. You take the train down from Westport or Bridgeport or Stanford or whatever. And I'll tell you, the Big East tournament, anytime UConn plays at Madison Square Garden, you get on that train early in the morning until about 3-4 hours before tip-off, that train is packed with UConn fans. And so essentially Rick Pitino is saying, why are we going to play them at the Garden when they're going to bring 10,000 fans and basically make it a neutral site to road game for us? We'll play them in Carnesecca, harder to get tickets there. Our fans will gobble up all the tickets, and we'll play the Butlers, Marquettes, Seton Halls at the Garden. Well, I bring it up. That alone is kind of interesting. But what Dan Hurley said next, the back and forth was very interesting. Here is what Dan Hurley had to say when he was asked about it. Dan Hurley, of course, is the UConn head coach. He was asked about it on Monday before their game against DePaul. Here is what he said. He said, listen, when you've been ranked in the top 5 or whatever, we've been the whole year, and you're the defending national champions and you've had all the success we've had at UConn, everyone's gunning for us. Everyone's trying to get what we have. We've won 4 national championships since 2000 here at UConn. They haven't had as much success since then, especially when they went from Fran Fraschilla to Mike Jarvis, and they had those really good teams with Ron Artest. They're trying to do what they need to do to build up their program, but anyone not named Duke, Carolina, Kansas, Kentucky, I'm probably going to miss a few teams. They're all going for where we're at. We've had unbelievable success here in basketball. There are programs who haven't been to a Final Four or haven't been to the NCAA tournament in 20 years, so they're obviously punching up. The insinuation that St. John's, and this is true, they have not won a tournament game since, I believe, 2000, and Dan Hurley says they're punching up. Last part, Steve Masiello coached I believe was a student assistant for Pitino at Kentucky. He then goes to Twitter and says, he tweets this: I think Coach Pitino stopped punching up after his 5th Final Four. Or was it his 6th? No, wait, I think it was after his 7th. So for people who missed that, Pitino says we're not playing UConn at Madison Square Garden. Dan Hurley says everybody's gunning for us, but I'm not punching down. A St. John's assistant says Pitino stopped punching up after his 5th Final Four. No, his 6th Final Four. No, his 7th Final Four. You know what this feels like to me? It feels like the Anchorman fight when everybody's coming for everybody else. And it is just, chef's kiss. This is great. This is great. I love it. Let's just very quickly dive in because I think this is awesome. First of all, let me say this, and this might make UConn fans mad. I actually don't blame Rick Pitino for this. If this is true, and Pitino, he's been known through the years to maybe fabricate or exaggerate on the truth on certain things. But if this is true, I don't blame him, right? Any competitive advantage you can have, you have to, within the rules, you have to take advantage of. Got to do it. We talk about in football all the time, growing the grass long to slow down fast teams, muddy fields. In basketball, it's not as easy. But what Pitino said makes sense, right? Is like, why are we going to play them in Madison Square Garden and let them bring 10,000 fans or 8,000 fans or whatever? We'll play them at Carnesecca. It'll be fine, blah, 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 this and that. So I don't blame Pitino at all for doing this. But let me just say the very public back and forth is great for college basketball. You have a huge brand in UConn. You have a brand in a market that is massive. Rick Pitino is trying to turn New York City into a college basketball town. And what I'll say is this. I really do think there is animosity. I really do think Rick Pitino is coming for Dan Hurley, and I really do think Dan Hurley doesn't like it. And what I love about this, you have two very successful people, two national championship winning coaches that aren't going to back down. Okay, Dan Hurley, listen, I'll be blunt, don't know him well. I don't want to say I know him at all. I don't know him at all. Never had him on the show, never spoken with him privately. I'm not going to pretend to have a relationship that I don't. But the one thing that I say, and I've said it a million times, I respect the hell out of how he carries himself. One thing, when he got to UConn, we're not backing down from anybody. We're not backing down from expectations. This is UConn. We expect to be great. We expect to win championships. When they lost early in the NCAA tournament, his first couple of years, he said, this is not how it's going to be. When he lost, period, early on, he said, this is not how it's going to be. And I've told you before, but even when, I'll give you an example of this guy just being unafraid. A few weeks ago, they lose to Kansas at Fog Allen. It's a game that I went to, okay? I bring it up because really what impressed me about Dan Hurley was after the game, go to the press room. We have our media availability. And somebody asked him, he said, Coach, and he prefaces the question by saying, Coach, no, it's only one loss. We don't want to get too high. We don't want to get too low. And Dan Hurley cuts him off. He says, no. We're going to get low. We're UConn. We don't expect to lose, and we are never going to accept losing here. And I freaking love that. It is so clear that Dan Hurley is not backing down from expectations. And now that UConn is on top of this conference, at least now Big East fans would say they're not on top. They didn't win the Big East last year, but they're the reigning national champions. And he ain't going to let anybody bully him or push him around. And what I love is the response from Rick Pitino's staff and Steve Masiello. It's clear that word got back to him. It's clear that they're not happy, and it's clear that they ain't backing down either. And so, again, this feels like the Anchorman fight. They're ready to go at it. They're ready to fight. They're ready to brawl. Neither side is backing down. Two big egos, two national championship winning coaches. And I'll say this, I love it for this simple reason. I think we have too much niceness in sports right now. I'll tell you this, I'm going to sound like a boomer, and I don't care. I'm going to say it anyway. It really annoys me. The jersey swap at the end of all these games really annoys me. I'm just going to say it. Makes me sound like a boomer. I don't care. I'm just going to say it. The bottom line is when you go to war with somebody for 60 minutes, and I understand, and Jim Calhoun actually said this on the show the other day when he came on. He said, you go to war, that's fine. After the war, you can shake hands and whatever. But it kind of bothers me. You're trying to win. You're trying to this. You're trying to that. And then you just go shake hands, or shaking hands is cool. You go trade jerseys. You go take pictures. You just lost. You just lost. Enough with the shaking hands. Enough with the pictures. Enough with the smiling. You should be furious that you just lost. And so I love that Dan Hurley and Rick Pitino do not like each other. There's too much niceness in sports. Nobody's rivalries. Nobody's mad. Nobody's angry. Name me a sport. Like what is the best rivalry right now in the NBA or in the NFL? I mean, I guess it's the historic Eagles, Cowboys, whatever, but there's no bad blood. There's no Manning versus Brady. There isn't any of that right now. And so I love this. I hope it keeps going. And to answer your question, let me make sure I get this right. TDA 3397. I know you're a St. John's fan, but I love it as well. All right, one more mailbag question. This one came from Laren, listener of the show. Very appreciative of your sport, Laren. Tweets me all the time, sends me questions all the time. Can't get to all of them. But he sent me a great question. He said, Torres, I have a question about Kentucky hoops. If Justin Edwards gets going and DJ Wagner plays like we all know he can, is it possible that we have 4 lottery picks in Justin Edwards, DJ Wagner, Aaron Bradshaw, and Reed Shepherd projected lottery by ESPN? I think that's the site, he says. Or is it out of the realm of possibilities to think that maybe we have 5 first-round picks in Bradshaw, Shepherd, Justin Edwards, DJ Wagner, and Rob Dillingham? Great question, Laren. I really want to dive into this one. So this is a really fun one. So why it's interesting is a couple things. First of all, we all know Kentucky is awesome this year, right? And it is because of the freshmen. And what Laren is essentially asking is, can Kentucky tie its own record? For people who do not know, 2010 Kentucky Wildcats, 5 first-round NBA draft picks. John Wall, DeMarcus Cousins, Patrick Patterson, Eric Bledsoe, Daniel Orton. By the way, some guy wrote a great book about that team. It's called One in Fun. May have heard of it. Written by yours truly, Torres. Yes, I interviewed John Wall, Eric Bledsoe, Patrick Patterson, John Calipari, you name it. Give you a little link in the show description if you want to go ahead and order a copy or two. Great Christmas gift. It's a little late for Christmas gifts, but birthday, Hanukkah, Easter, Father's Day, Mother's Day, whatever. Anyway, Laren's asking, can we set that record? And specifically, can we tie the record? Can these guys be lottery picks? Can we make it happen? I'm here to say, Laren, I may sound crazy and I may end up looking dumb. I think Kentucky is going to tie that record of 5 first-round draft picks. Don't know if they'll all be in the lottery, but I think all 5 guys are absolutely in play. First of all, quick backstory. Rob Dillingham, just so you know, Rob Dillingham, leading scorer of those freshmen, 14 points per game, 4.5 assists. Reed Sheppard probably playing like an All-American, 12.5 points per game, 4.5 rebounds, 4 assists, 3 steals, 1 block per game, playing like an All-American. DJ Wagner, 12 points per game. Justin Edwards, the quote-unquote disappointment of the group, averaging just under double figures, 10 points per game. And Aaron Bradshaw, who has only played 5 games because of injury, averaging 7.2 points per game. So the question is, can they all be first-round picks? First of all, I think this, a couple things. One, Rob Dillingham, I think there's 2 that are just no doubt, if they declare, they're one and done. Rob Dillingham is one. The most recent thing I saw from ESPN, Jonathan Givony, had Rob Dillingham in the top 10. This is a kid that is super athletic, super quick twitch. The one thing about the NBA, there are certain things, like everybody can shoot and has an IQ and has this and has that. There are certain guys that even in a league full of the world's best athletes are a different stratosphere of athlete. That is Rob Dillingham. Rob Dillingham has the type of quick twitch athleticism that I would guess there's probably less than 10 guards in the league that have that type of athleticism. I'm not saying he's quite Russell Westbrook or Derrick Rose, but he's that like next tier down, and he's way up from most guys in the league. He's going in the first round. Reed Sheppard, if he declares, I think is going in the first round. Now, I'm not sold that he's going to declare. He didn't come into the season thinking he was a one and done. I think he probably will declare. But I think the idea of him as an NBA draft prospect is so new to that family that they're probably processing it all. I would venture to guess he goes. I don't think it's certain, but if he goes, he's going to be in the first round, probably as a lottery pick, because he's already, the role that he plays at Kentucky is what he's going to need to do in the NBA. Defend, jump passing lanes, play off the ball, play on the ball, shoot threes. He's going in the lottery. I think he's going at least in the first round, if not the lottery. So I think those 2 are going in. The question is, can you get the other 3? And I think the answer is absolutely yes. First off, let me say this. You guys and girls know I love college hoops. This is shaping up to be a historically bad NBA draft. And I know what people say, oh, they say that every year. No. This one is bad, okay? So first of all, G League Ignite, and I'm not here to always criticize Ignite. I say it all the time. Jason Hart, former Syracuse player, former NBA player, former USC assistant coach, runs that program. I think Jason Hart's one of the great coaches that I've met in basketball. But they took too many guys. You read reports, those guys are struggling. Ron Holland, who was supposed to go to Arkansas, he's struggling. He's falling down draft boards. Matas Buzelis is falling down draft boards. So the Ignite guys are struggling. They're falling down draft boards. A lot of the college players are struggling and falling down draft boards. Isaiah Collier, great start to the year, has struggled the last 5 or 6 weeks. USC is a mess right now. UCLA brought in all those international guys. They're struggling right now. Donovan Clingan, UConn. I love the kid. He's had 2 major foot injuries this year, 2 major lower body injuries is probably the right way to say it. He's going to be under very serious surveillance going into the draft. You have a bunch of international guys playing overseas. You don't know about competition, how good, how bad, this, that. A lot of them are going to get drafted and high. Some of them are going to fall, though. So you look at this NBA draft, it's shaping up to be really bad. And that's where I think these Kentucky guys can step in. Rob Dillingham and Reed Sheppard, in my opinion, are definitely going in the first round. I feel pretty good about the other three as well. Let's actually start with the guy that Laren mentioned first, and that's Justin Edwards. You could argue that out of everybody, he's actually struggling more than anybody on the team, averaging 9.8 points per game, but only shooting 25% from three. And keep in mind, this was a kid that in the preseason, some mock drafts had him as the #1 overall pick, and some recruiting services had him as the #1 player coming out of high school. And so he's been a disappointment so far. But what I truly believe, he's going to figure it out. Because the one thing about Justin Edwards that I've been impressed by, he hasn't once at any point sulked or been sad or been mad or been a bad teammate. North Carolina game, biggest game of the year. Team's playing well. He's on the bench. He's waving a towel. He's excited. He's happy for his teammates. So the attitude is good. And I think everything else is going to come around. I say it every year with these Kentucky freshmen. It takes time. I go back to the year of Tyler Hero. Tyler Hero was terrible for about the first 6 weeks of the season. And there were fans that were like, you can't play this kid, Cal. And they kept playing him. They kept playing him. They kept playing him. And by the end of the year, he was one of the most dynamic players in the sport. Heck, I'll talk about the book that I wrote, One and Fun. I talked to Cal about this 7-8 years ago when I wrote the book. He said John Wall's first year, he's coming in my office every day thinking he's not good enough for this level. Eric Bledsoe, the same. So this isn't a new thing that some guys are going to struggle. But he's got the right attitude. I think he's going to figure it out. And I think even if he doesn't, he's got the measurables. If the NBA is going to take a chance on a kid, they're going to take a chance on a kid that's 6'8", plays super hard, has proven he can hit three-pointers. I think that kid's going in the first round. DJ Wagner, I think, is going in the first round, averaging 12 points per game. He's already had multiple 20-plus point games, so he's proven he can do it at this level. And the thing I keep saying about DJ, first of all, he's going to have some really big games. And we all know NCAA tournament, late in the season, spotlights on everybody. You have a couple big games in the tournament, that stands out to NBA people. But what I also keep going back to with DJ Wagner, I think he's just one of these players that's being overanalyzed right now because he's been in the spotlight for so long. This kid was basically the #1 high school player in his class as a freshman. Never really lost the spot. By the end of the year, by the end of his senior year, he's a top 4, top 5 player. So you know how many times he's been seen by scouts and evaluators and eventually NBA people? Team USA stuff, McDonald's All-American game, FIBA, whatever. He's playing really well for freshmen. 12 points per game, 22 20-plus point games before January 1. That's a great freshman season. Wait until he fully clicks. Right now, he's projected as like a fringe first-round guy. I think he gets in there. The guy that I'm interested in is Aaron Bradshaw. 7'1", coming off injury. But even him, what stands out to me about him, he's come back, he's bought into his role, and he's got a great attitude. And again, it's the measurables. 7'1", super athletic, shot blocker, willing to play a role. That's another thing. A lot of these kids come in, if they struggle, they pout, they whine, they complain. Heck, we see it in the pros. Patrick Mahomes is whining all the time. This kid has come in, rebound, effort, energy, shot blocking. Get a 7'1" guy, 19 years old, that kind of frame, that kind of athleticism, you can teach him a lot. I would say of the 5, he's the one that I could see falling, but I think he's going to end up in the first round. And I do think we're going to get 5 first-rounders from the University of Kentucky. All right, I think that's it from this episode of the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. It is time for me. It's time for me to get out of here. If you're not subscribed to the show, please make sure to do so. Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Music, wherever you listen to the podcast, make sure to subscribe. Make sure to subscribe on YouTube. Closing in on 32,000 subscribers. We're going to get there, but not without your support. Make sure to subscribe. We'll be doing more college hoops, by the way, in the coming weeks as that season ramps up and college football ramps down. All for today's show. Appreciate everybody's support. I'll be back on Friday. How about I give you a national championship pick on Friday? That's all. Shout out to Torrent Craig. Shout out to Rachel, who hates my voice. Shout out to JJ Reddick, you F-head. Unblock me, bro. I'll be back tomorrow. National championship pick and preview. Aaron Torres Pod.